All right, so I am going to be talking about everyone's favorite project, Titanic II. What is the current status? What are the biggest questions here as we are well into 2023? A project that was originally announced all the way back in 2012, the Clive Palmer model, the extra safety deck. Let's get into some of the bigger questions here in 2023, starting with it's a simple question. Will this ever happen? And my answer to that question is absolutely the Titanic II will happen. It is inevitable. It's a matter of time. There's simply too much demand. There are a lot of details that we don't know about, including the biggest one, and this kind of branches off of, will this project happen? Okay, so if it's happening, is the Clive Palmer model actually gonna work? Is Clive Palmer gonna finance this? I would say at this point it's looking more and more unlikely. We've heard nothing back from the Blue Star Line in the past 5 years. Their last update was September 27th, 2018. They released a press release on their website announcing that work for the project would recommence in September of 2022. So 4 years later, a London-based financial site tried contacting Blue Star Line for a status update on the project, but received no response. So in terms of the Clive Palmer model, I think it's going to come down to somebody getting an interview with him and saying, what happened to Titanic II? At that point, I'm guessing he's going to say, yes, the project is abandoned because we're going on 11 years and it still hasn't happened. And that kind of brings us into the next question. How much will Titanic II actually cost? Now, we saw the initial estimates back in 2012, 2013, that it would be right around $500 million, so $500 million. My current estimation with the inflation we're experiencing, with some other things, the price of certain materials going up, I would say it would probably cost around $750 million, which, if you find the right billionaire who's obsessed with the Titanic, it would be extremely easy to finance, because this is not even a situation where you're talking about just throwing $1 billion down the drain. Because it is technically a cruise ship, and it's going to get a bunch of people onto it, Titanic, the most famous ship ever, it's going to make whoever builds this thing their money back, at least part of their money back. So I'm going to say right now around $750 million. Yes, that's a big number, but it just comes down to the right billionaire wanting to do it. If you want to talk about some of these billionaires, Elon Musk spent $44 billion on Twitter. So think about that compared to the Titanic II only costing $750 million. Yes, it's a ton of money, but I'm just saying when you scale it, it can easily be done. And that brings us into the next question. What does the interior of Titanic II, what is it going to look like? Well, right now, the only reference we really have is the Clive Palmer model. And you can see, personally, I do like this model. It is what it is with putting the lifeboats into one of the decks. You're kind of forced to do that with the modern regulations, and then they have kind of the, fake, older lifeboats on top to try and mimic what the Titanic originally looked like. You can see they're adding an entire extra deck, or supposedly they're adding. This is the Clive Palmer model, but I do think no matter who ends up building Titanic II, this is a pretty good design because you still keep the accuracy of the original lifeboat on the boat deck, which really makes it look like the Titanic, and you just add an entire new safety deck. That would be kind of like the modern deck, to where that did not exist on the original Titanic. That's where the casino would be. That's where the bar area would be, more modern type stuff. And the entire rest of the ship should be, a complete replica, including the grand staircase, the aft grand staircase, the first class private promenade rooms, the first class staterooms, the second class staterooms, the second class staircase, the Turkish baths, the swimming pool. Looking at renderings of Clive Palmer's model, all of it is direct to scale. And that brings us to the next question, because I did not mention third class. The big question is, what happens with the third class? Because I would imagine Titanic II on its maiden voyage, everything is going to be sold out. The ticket prices are going to be ridiculous. But once it gets a few cruises into its lifespan, if you're going to rebuild the third class exactly the same and historically accurate, even some of those second class rooms, they're just not up to modern standards when you look at normal cruise ship cabins, basically mimicking like a hotel room compared to what the third class would be, which would be 2 bunk beds with nothing, no room, no area. What happens with Titanic II when the new novelty of it wears off? Do they turn that into storage? Do they make that, maybe for the crew? I don't really know what they would do. I would just kind of estimate that they would really have trouble, even though we all love the Titanic, it's great. What would happen in terms of the demand for those rooms? Because let me just tell you, there's going to be zero demand for those rooms from anyone casual, even if they're casual Titanic fans. There's still not going to be any demand to spend money to go in one of those rooms that's just ridiculously small, not even close to the standards, when you could go on one of the bigger Oasis of the Seas, Symphony of the Seas, and do that. I understand it's the whole Titanic experience being on the ship. I get it, but I do have to ponder, what is the total demographic, to where the demand meets it? Does it possibly turn into a floating museum to where, this is an interesting idea. Imagine, and this might be what it ends up doing, you build the thing, you take it on voyages, maybe at a certain point, because there's not a lot of demand for the third class, it becomes a floating museum to where you could put it, in different docks around the world for a month, and people can go on it. And, it's just an interesting idea, because I'm concerned about the third class situation when it comes to people actually buying those tickets a year or two into it. That could be a problem. And then the other big time question, how does the class system work? Because, the first class tickets, they're especially early on, if Titanic II actually gets built, they're going to be very, very expensive, right? They're going to be out of a lot of people's budget. So a lot of people, traditional families, are going to be looking for second class tickets, maybe even third class. Would third class passengers, would second class passengers be allowed, in the Grand Staircase area? Are they trying to be 100% historically accurate and say no second class, no third class in the first class smoking room, in the first class reading and writing room? How does that whole thing work? Because if you're buying and paying a lot of money even for a second class ticket, you would still want to see the Grand Staircase. You'd still want to see all of that. I'm guessing it would be open to everyone, but that would kind of cut down some of the historical accuracy of the entire project if they did that. But I do think that's kind of how that would work. But those are just kind of some major questions when it comes to the Titanic II situation. I'm not even going to ballpark a potential date for when Titanic II could actually get made, because, it's just 2012. We're already in 2023. That's 11 years. They want to build it in China because it's cheaper. If I had to throw out a year, I would say 2028, 2029, somewhere around there is a possibility for it. And that would be to just start building it. The Chinese Titanic, we don't know what's going on with that. That might also be a complete failure and a lost cause at this point. It really doesn't matter. It didn't even look like that ship was accurate to me. But either way, that is the current situation and the biggest question surrounding Titanic II. I would be interested in some type of data research to where they could show the demand for a potential Titanic II if they wanted to build it. There's also the idea, if you think about it, the Titanic was the best ship in 1912. Does recreating it right now really make sense? Like, the whole idea of the Titanic is it's the greatest ship ever. Or would it be better to make just a massive, similar looking Titanic with the 4 funnels, but make it completely modern and make it very luxurious? Would that be a better, idea rather than making a complete replica? I don't know. It's something to think about. I would say the replica probably should be made. I have seen a few different cruise ship models that kind of replicate the Titanic look to it with the paint color and stuff like that. And I would just say one last quick thing on the Titanic II. What about the idea of giving everyone a smaller, condensed private promenade deck, like on the upper decks. So you would expand the Titanic II. You know those square windows, I believe on B deck? Expand that, make it like 3 decks high, and give everyone a private promenade deck. There's no balconies on this proposed. Maybe this would be the Titanic III, and just make it way bigger and give everyone a smaller private promenade room. That would be an interesting idea. Imagine a rendering for something like that. Just add like 4 or 5 more decks, and you still have the portholes underneath. You need the portholes, and no balconies. That's the other thing, because that would make it look too modern. But the other thing, it's like, listen, somebody has to do an interview with Clive Palmer. This is getting ridiculous. At least come out and admit it's not happening, so maybe someone else can take over the project. But that is my opinion on that. Either way, guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.